All right, we're going to move into our next presentation. We actually have a little bit of throwback from yesterday, some more impacts and lessons learned from COVID-19. We're going to hear from Sal Hernandez, an associate professor at Oregon State University. Sal's current research leverages knowledge and experience to produce solutions to the complex and multifaceted problems inherent in transportation systems. His research derives knowledge from social sciences and computational sciences to create meaningful solutions for problems in transportation safety and freight logistics. So he's going to be talking with us today about some measures of freight network resiliency during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sal, if you're online, if you could unmute.
So again, thank you very much for that. The purpose of the research, actually we presented part of this research at a workshop during TRB, but I'll be presenting some of the things that I will be focusing on from the stuff that we did from Oregon. But first I want to give thanks to my collaborators in this research. I worked with Sarah Hernandez from no relation to myself, but we always get confused by being either brother or sister or something else. We're really good friends. She's an assistant professor, now associate professor at our University of Arkansas. Andrew Balthrop from, again, University of Arkansas, and myself. This was a study that we conducted during the actual pandemic itself. It was quite timely research that both our university transportation centers decided it was important to fund and for us to pursue. But before I get into that, I want to talk about a little bit things that we're doing here in Oregon with regard to some of the most relevant projects to this group. And so I'll discuss a few snapshots and some ODOT project objectives and goals that we've been fulfilling here in the state of Oregon. So some of the first, we have 4 quick little projects to present. The first one deals with something that I presented 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. I can't remember, our last meeting in Colorado before the COVID. I talked about the project and we had just started out. This was expanding the Oregon Motor Carrier Safety Action Plan. And so we were looking at how best to utilize state funds to continue to improve driver safety, truck driver safety in the state. And again, the goal of this study was to reduce truck driver at-fault crashes in Oregon. And again, this was accomplished by addressing unsafe truck driver behavior, working with our local law enforcement agencies. And now that Oregon is a part of the MICSAP program, we're utilizing the results from this study and looking forward to see how we can continue to improve overall driving safety of truck drivers in the state of Oregon. And we did see a considerable improvement through this program over the last 3 or 4 years of the study, especially improvement in driver behaviors, for example, speeding, inattentive driving, and so forth, and also distracted driving issues. So that was a neat thing. So that this project ends this June, and we will be having a final report out finally sometime late summer for us to share to the group. The second project is a relatively new project. We just started in November. This one's looking at the trends and challenges posed by medium-duty trucks to the operation and safety of Oregon highways. The primary goal of this initiative is to provide the agency, ODOT in this case, with a comprehensive understanding of medium-duty truck operations, identifying some of the potential areas of risk because of this size of these types of vehicles, and be able to forecast future operational growth and monetization of the costs associated with these changes. So right now, obviously in the state of Oregon, at least in the state of Oregon, they only can really track trucks with CDL drivers because they're, those are the things that they can definitely tax and look at, the issues with infrastructure degradation and improvement because of overall truck traffic. But we saw even during the pandemic, we saw an overwhelmingly increase in the number of these types of vehicles on our highway system. These are vehicles between 10,000 and 26,000 pounds. So Oregon's interested in seeing, while these are vehicles also creating damage to the infrastructure, to road infrastructure, what could we do to see what is the extent of this damage, and is there any safety issues related to crashes with regard to these vehicles? So again, this is that that movement of shorter hauls, last mile delivery issues, and so Oregon is really interested in seeing what is going on with this trend. So basically, we're trying to evaluate the safety data to compare and contrast crash rates with regard to this type of vehicle, incidents, and other relevant safety data involving medium trucks compared to those of heavier vehicle trucks requiring CDL drivers in order to determine whether there is a statistical difference between these two populations. So that's of importance to the state of Oregon. We just started this research. We're in the data collection phase and also interview phase of interviewing various companies that have these types of vehicles and operational vehicles. The next quick ODOT project, the next two are actually pretty fun. These These are utilizing some of the new tools that we have at Oregon State University. This first one is a support for crash data analysis at signalized intersections and roundabouts in Oregon from the perspective of heavy vehicles. So basically, we teamed up with Oregon's Traffic Safety Division to determine if typology of heavy vehicle involved crashes differ at traffic signals and roundabouts in such a way that it should be considered in the selection process for Oregon's intersection control plans and also designs. So this is an interesting project. Well, I'll show a couple of little clips on this, but we are using our newly acquired, well, over a year now, truck driving heavy vehicle simulator, and also some of our drone technology to kind of study this problem out. So I have a couple of little snapshots here in the next couple of slides on that. The next fun project is we're looking at some preliminary investigations of heavy vehicle parking design in Oregon rest areas. And this pretty much is looking at the following issue. ODOT does not have a robust guidance related to striping plans for heavy vehicle parking facilities and also in rest areas. This guidance does not exist, at least in our knowledge, nationally as national standards either. And this can be that can be actually adopted by Oregon to improve their overall capacity and facility and improvement in safety within these facilities. Again, we are working with ODOT, our partners, of course, and using both our drone and truck simulator technology to develop these guidelines. And this is something that really came out of two previous truck parking studies that were sponsored by Oregon Department of Transportation. One looked at just overall crash and overall capacity of trucking facilities in the state. Another one looked at really a statewide look at the actual problem itself. And it required to look at it also in that second study, they interviewed both the trucking companies themselves, both locally and regionally, in addition to interviewing truck drivers with regard to what are some of the reasons why they don't park at truck parking facilities. And it was quite interesting that a great majority of the actual companies mentioned to us through these interviews that they are actually telling the truck drivers not to park at certain facilities because of the increased possibility of PDO incidents within those trucking facilities, which kind of gave that motivation for the study and looking at is it the overall spacing, is it the design, or is it something else? So ODOT is looking at various alternatives to improving capacity utilization in current truck parking facilities in the state, which are underutilized, but we are seeing a number of trucks parking just a mile or 2 miles down the road, or even along even close to the trucking facility, but not parking in the facility. So that was a big motivating factor for that research. And again, we're using both the truck simulator and our drone technology to help us improve and look at some of these behaviors that we're viewing in. And so again, I got a quick little slide on those as well. Well, these are some of the 4 ongoing projects. There are 2 others, which they just started last week, so not much more to inform you on those, but these are some 4 ongoing ODOT projects that we are working out of Oregon State University currently. So here's just a quick picture of our heavy vehicle simulator. This is one of our PhD students testing it out. This is a quarter cab heavy vehicle driving simulator. It's an FAAC real-time technologies TT1000 research grade truck driver simulator. It's one of 2. Just from a research perspective, is one of the largest in the state, in the nation, as we believe some of the research we've been doing. And just recently, because of the current research we've done with the simulator, the Murdoch Charitable Trust has provided OSU a sizable investment to increase our simulator capabilities, both from the heavy vehicle side, as well as the passenger and pedestrian and bicyclist simulators that we have currently here at Oregon State. In addition to our newly minted construction simulator labs here at Oregon State University. So we're really growing with respect to our abilities to provide these types of technologies. So just from a aerial perspective, this is a quick snapshot of one of the truck parking facilities that we're working with in the state of Oregon. And kind of we use our drone technology to first take pictures of the actual facilities, and 2, to observe behaviors that were addressed during the survey and also commented during the survey that we actually viewed. And it was really nice to see that correlation with the surveys that we and interviews that we conducted with the actual video footage of that same behavior, where trucks are parking along the side of the roadways. And it's very hard for them to maneuver in current, or at least navigate in these current designs for various truck parking facilities. And as noted by some of the trucking companies, that these facilities were really designed for the 1960s and 70s, types of trucks. Now the different configurations of trucks has changed considerably, which is causing an issue with regard to that truck parking issue. So, again, we're trying to see if we can improve the current designs to increase capacity or at least utilization, that's it, of these facilities, and also improve safety and reduce those PDO incidents within the actual facilities, and encourage some of these trucking companies to actually ask drivers to utilize these parking facilities rather than parking on ramps or off ramps or other roadway segments. And so we're using this information, and we're actually inputting this information into our simulator so that we can actually have truck drivers come into our lab and test out some of these new design features, working with our partners with OTA, Oregon Trucking Association, as well as working with E-Road, who are based out of Oregon. They have their U.S. headquarters here in Oregon, Tualatin, Oregon, and also working with ODOT's, some of their CDL drivers, and to come into our lab and kind of test out some of these newer designs. And then this is an ongoing research project, and it also ends in June, and we will have a final report sometime in the summer with regard to some of the findings that we found, and improve, and also design guidelines with regard to striping and improving current facilities without having to come in with some incredible investment to actually improve capacity and utilization and safety of these facilities. The next picture is just one of our roundabout pictures. This is a quick video on how we've used, how we see trucks navigating through roundabouts. There's been a lot of issue here in Oregon, and I imagine across the U.S. as well, with having enough gaps or headway for some of these trucks to actually enter the facilities. And so this is just, we're using this technology along with our actual simulator as well to model some of these issues and challenges to see how we can improve, the overall consent of truck drivers to utilize these types of roadway facilities, and also improve safety in these systems. So this is also an ongoing project. Also, we'll be finishing up here in June. We will have a final project report in the summer for these projects. And again, all our staff are certified by ODOT and also FAA for unmanned aircraft operations in the state of Oregon. So that's quite neat that we have this ability to do this in-house at Oregon State University. So I'm now kind of going into the meat of the project. So some of the ODOT projects that we are working with, and this project also was in essence sponsored by ODOT during the pandemic, especially from the Transportation Planning Division, was interested in seeing how the landscape of the actual freight system in Oregon was changing during that pandemic period, especially when we saw that some of the federal restrictions on hours of service were relaxed, and how that impacted overall truck movements in the state. And so from a motivational standpoint, this survey that we conducted was a result of, again, several, also in addition to ODOT and some of the other DOT's concerns. This study looked at understanding what are some of the well, first of all, motivation was some of the stories that we're reading nationwide with regard to rest stops closures and truck stop closures that were occurring during the early stages of the pandemic, and what were some of these impacts or effects. So here's just a couple of stories that we grabbed off the internet during that time period. And so in addition to the hours of service restrictions that were lifted, for the first time in a long time, we were believing that this could also have impacted driver safety in some manner. So our survey had a substantial number of questions, and we conducted this using the Qualtrics platform, because we wanted to reach the largest number of folks quickly and nationally. So we used the Qualtrics survey platform. Our survey was conducted between May 25th to June 1st, when the hours of service regulations were partially lifted and near the height of the social distancing and stay-at-home orders across the U.S. We had over 500 respondents, and again, we used a Qualtrics non-probability internet opt-in panel for commercial truck drivers for the ages of 18 and older who had used a public or private truck stop while driving during the pandemic. And also participants were provided an incentive for completing the survey. Again, this also increases the opportunity of truthful answerings of questions. In addition, that we had a couple of other questions along the survey to verify just consistencies of answers along the question. So we had different ways of making sure that some of the questions were answered correct, truthfully. Overall, although we collected 500 responses, we had over 2,000 survey responses that we whittled down to 500 responses that were complete, and also met some of our metrics with regard to truthfulness of answering some of these questions. So again, participants were provided this incentive, and questions were comparable to some of the operational and behavioral patterns that we observed during the pandemic itself. So just some quick demographics of the survey. Again, there was over 66 questions, and we are conducting some final analysis of the data itself, both at Arkansas and Oregon State University. So these are, again, preliminary results that we presented at TRB, at the Transportation Research Board conference. So basic demographics, we had 66% of the respondents were male, 40% had 2 to 3 years of driving experience, whereas for another 40% had between 6 to 10 years of driving experience. Income level ranged between 60 to 80,000 K in hourly pay. About 40% were for hire and private carriers, and about 30% were working for a company that with about 11 to 25 drivers. So that was kind of our demographic pool for this data. Again, not by no means a very extensive, huge, large scale survey, but it provided some very statistically significant and meaningful results so far as we are analyzing the data carefully. So from the perspective of the survey itself, I wanted to focus on a couple of questions of interest for us. From Oregon's perspective, we were interested in the truck parking issue. We were interested in fatigue management and tired, and just how drivers were managing fatigue during the COVID period. So that's kind of the extent of what I'm going to focus here on the next couple of slides. So here in this slide, the time of day reported by truck parking difficulties, when asked about their ability to find safe and adequate truck parking, these drivers that we interviewed through Qualtrics platform, we asked a during and before question. So during and before the pandemic, drivers then were asked to report if it was easier to find truck parking before or during the pandemic. And from what we see from our results, right, that really it wasn't that much different to actually find truck parking availability during the pandemic. And this could be potentially explained by total traffic volume restrictions for everyday drivers being down due to stay-at-home orders. The shorter frequencies of distances that truck drivers were driving from different locations to meet demand for various products at different locations. So this, there's some attribution there that we're trying to correlate with some of the actual data that we're collecting to kind of correlate some of these results that we see from our survey. The second slide here, when we asked about drivers' service disruptions and overall experience with service disruptions at both public and private facilities, drivers tended to respond by saying that there were fewer service disruptions during the pandemic and comparisons to before. So for example, restroom availability, dine-in and food services, although there were some dine-in services, issues across the states, but again, not every state was the same. So again, this kind of could be capturing some of the diversity and different views of different states. But in overall, most truck drivers that we interviewed across the nation said that they experienced fewer service disruptions on that end. And then again, this could be, as I mentioned, attributed to some spatial distribution of our respondents in the study and the varying restrictions across the U.S. at the time of the pandemic, right? Not everybody was on lockdown in comparison to what we had here in the West Coast. This next slide here basically just gives a little good overview of what drivers with regard to perception of roadway safety. So drivers were again asked here to rate how safe roads were during the pandemic. And it was interesting to find that many reported that roads were much safer now than before. And again, this is attributed to the traffic volumes and the interactions with vehicles on the system. So they felt safer without having these crazy drivers cutting them off on the highway system, driving 80 miles an hour. So that was interesting to see that they felt more comfortable or just had that perception. And also part of the study, we asked drivers on average how much faster they drove on the facilities. And we interviewed truck drivers ourselves in addition to the survey, and most said they were driving about 10 to 15 miles over the speed limit. In some cases, we had some guys saying, hey, whenever possible, we can drive us, up to 20 miles an hour, but mostly 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. And we asked questions with regard to risk-taking behavior, with regard to their driving behaviors. And most said that they weren't really afraid of being pulled over because of the current pandemic. They needed to get the product from point A to point B. And law enforcement agencies that we've talked, at least in Oregon, pretty much collaborated some of those things. But again, if it was if there were safety issues, definitely they were interacting and improving safety from that perspective. But those are some interesting topics there. So this is kind of some of the overall, just some of the few slides. Again, we will have a final report and some journal papers coming out here in this late summer to provide to the group with regard to the survey results. So what I wanted to focus on too a little bit more, some of the things that we were focusing on here is the
Sal?
Yes.
Sal, hello, this is Brenda. I apologize, but you are at your time limit.
Oh, okay, sure. I'll just go ahead and give a quick conclusion here, if you don't mind. So just future work from this work. My timer was off. I apologize. So just from the future work perspective, we're going to be utilizing some of the current survey results, in addition to some of the results that we're collecting from our current ODOT projects to work with ODOT, OTA, on improving fatigue management of truck drivers in the state. And we did see during the survey, during that pandemic period, that a lot of drivers were actually, a good percentage, 20 to 30% of drivers were actually driving more, felt more fatigued while driving during this pandemic because of the stresses put on them to deliver goods on time, and also also waiting to be served at particular facilities was another issue for them during the pandemic. So that was some of the things that we're going to be working with ODOT there. So again, I apologize for the time, but I want to just give a thank to our data providers, also to ODOT, PacTrans, and the Oregon Trucking Association for working with us on these studies and providing feedback on our research. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sal. Yeah, I understand. There's like a lot of exciting projects, and
I know, exactly. A lot of cool things going on in Oregon. Yeah.
It's nice to be able to share information. So I'll definitely make sure everyone has your contact information if they'd like to follow up with you.
No problem. And the report, a lot of the reports are coming out this summer, so I'll definitely be sending those over to you.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Anything comes out, send it my way, and I'll be sure to post it and let everyone know.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks again, Sal.